Hello, this is the HatchetJob.com gaming netcast with our discussion of Bioshock Infinite. There are lots of spoilers and swearing, so please be aware. And also there are some Skype issues, so there are a few snap, crackles and pops. In the background you'll see general gameplay footage from the start of the game, but all the people on the show have finished it, and so we discuss all of the title. Anyway, that's it. Let's get on with the show.
Bioshock is a game I was really looking forward to playing. I had seen it had got very good scores. People were kind of talking about it excitedly, although I hadn't read any reviews, and I rented it. But I found that when I was playing it, I didn't really have the desire to tell anyone about it. For me, that's kind of telling, no pun intended, because if I play a game that really excites me or has mechanics that really intrigues me, I can't help but tell people about it. And Danjo, we never really discussed it. I never came to you and said, I've seen this great thing in Bioshock Infinite.
Well, I mean, there's the gameplay elements, which you're right. There's nothing there to make you go, oh, I've got to tell somebody about this, because it's fairly standard except for the rails, and the rails are adequate. They don't blow your socks off.
No.
And then the other stuff, which you might want to talk about, is very spoilery. So it seems like there's a barrier there, where there's some content that does make me go, oh yeah, I want to talk to this person about that. But unless they've finished the game, that's rude.
I wanted to do a joke about it being an on-rails shooter, but I can't decide whether I'm just being led into that by the people who made the game, or whether I've come up with that myself.
With regards to the rails, it was a nice idea. I really liked the sound effects. I'm not sure it worked quite as well as I wanted it to, because it felt like I was either approaching a target or a boat I had to jump on slightly too fast or slightly too slow.
Did you find that you could shoot people while you were on the rails?
I realised that you could. I didn't do it that often.
See, I found that to be really difficult. And I think that's an intrinsic property of when you're not in control of your character. It's very difficult to aim with the right stick. That's always been the case. I don't know if everyone's like this, but I know I do a lot of my aiming with the strafe capacity in most shooters, right? If you're on the rail, you can't strafe anymore, and you only have control over the speed of how you go forward and backwards, not actually whether you are or not. And so I think you've taken away a lot of the capacity to fine-tune controls, at least on a dual analog. I found I was using the rails for, I would be in one place and look at another place and go, hey, if I ride this rail, I could hop off here, and then I'd be there. And I just used it as a form of locomotion in and out of fights.
Yeah.
Which is fine. That is a tactical layer to add to it.
The other issue I had with it is that a lot of the special powers you had, when you find the outfits that you wear, like the boots and the hats or whatever they were, they seem to be weighted to rail use, even though rail use wasn't as prevalent as it was made out to be in the trailers, or as useful as it was made out to be in the trailers.
Yeah, between the gear and the early trailers, it makes me think they were shooting to fine-tune this mechanic to a point where your average player could be an effective combatant while on the rails, and never figured out how to tweak it to make that possible, and then reduced it.
I agree with that. I even found myself thinking that maybe they'd taken some of the rail sections out, whether that it had previously been a bigger part of the gameplay, but I'm not sure. I don't know whether people who played it changed around their hats or boots or whatever in order to make better advantage in different situations. I think I largely ignored the rail tuning stuff and tended to go more with, regular kind of power boosting or defense boosting. I did avoid the exotic upgrades.
I used the rail boosting stuff occasionally. The powers I used were when you land, you knock people back and then they catch on fire. But stuff like you reload faster when you jump onto and off a rail, it wasn't interesting for me. The way I play games now is, and when I'm presented with a list of powers, is I say to myself, which sounds cooler or which will look cooler, even if it isn't the most efficient thing, and that's the one I use.
So you wanted an augment that would allow you to put on another set of sunglasses every time you reloaded.
Yeah, exactly.
Just on top of the last pair, just over and over and over again.
So this is a slightly different point. It felt like there were loads of weapons that I never needed to use, and that there were too many upgrades for the weapons.
I think they force you into a relatively narrow amount of specialization through that. I don't know whether that's deliberate or not. I mean, I played on hard, where I think resources were harder to come by anyway.
I played on hard initially, and I wasn't having much fun. And then the problem is that in this kind of game where you have lots of powers, I think that hard and medium have to be very carefully judged, and they weren't particularly well judged here. And that's because I found that on medium, I was almost too efficient at killing people, which makes sense because I'm jacked up with all sorts of crazy shit. But on hard, it forced me into a game where I had to take cover a lot and pop and shoot people.
That's what hard's supposed to be.
The thing is, but that's not interesting when you have crazy shit. And so really what I wanted was something in the middle where the guys fight like they're on medium. So they are as deadly as they are on medium, but they have the same health as they do on hard, so that they are around longer for me to play with.
But it's safe enough for you to watch what happens afterwards. Huh.
So there's a bit of danger there, so I can't be too laissez-faire about it, but the difficulty is there for me to experiment with the systems rather than force me into playing it like every other fucking shooter out there.
Well, I think coming from your viewpoint, where you're shooting for spectacle, that does make sense. But if you're looking at it from we're trying to make this the most tactically interesting thing, the way they did it, I think, was very good.
What difficulty did you play on?
Hard.
Okay, so maybe I'm the pansy in the conversation, and that's fine.
I don't think it's about that. I think you could have played on either difficulty and possibly had a similar experience. I think Danjo's right. The hard, it does mean you need to take a bit more cover. The other interesting thing I found about the change in difficulty is I had a conversation after I'd finished the game with somebody who played on normal, and his experience of the game had been that he felt like the gameplay was rushed and that he'd shot through all of the interactive sections, if you like, with all the shooting, and that the storyline therefore offered like a change in pace for him. And I don't think I found that at all, because for me, especially early on when you don't have many powers, you were kind of creeping a little bit through the interactive bits, whether that's because occasionally you got killed more often or whether it's just because you were being more cautious. So I think I ended up with an overall different gameplay experience than him because I wasn't rushing through the interactive bits.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same way. I was pleased about halfway through thinking, oh man, I'm glad I started on hard, because if I can push through it at that difficulty, well then that's where I want to be. You're right, that makes the story bits not just a pace changer, but it feels a bit more integrated. Maybe not narratively, but in terms of pace.
Yeah, and I think you get a bit more satisfaction once you have upgraded your powers a bit and you start to feel the benefit of them.
So when you're talking about the story, are you talking about Elizabeth's arc or the things that flesh out the world?
But both of them, I think, for me. I think that various bits of the interactive story that are presented to you, like the choices over the bird or the cage, or heads or tails and all that kind of thing, I think they are deliberately designed not to give you any choice. And I think it's a commentary on games in general, especially linear shooter games, that you don't have any choice. And I think this is something they visited before in the Bioshock universe with, Andrew Ryan and Would You Kindly and all that kind of thing. And I think Infinite deliberately references that by essentially just taking away even the illusion of choice. And I think this is something that is reinforced by the story having an infinite number of universes from which it can draw variable things, but it makes very clear descriptions of things that it sees as fixed and unchangeable across all the universes.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Actually, you sound like you're somebody who goes to power stations and holds up pieces of cardboard with hieroglyphs written on them, and then you just wearing fucking plastic bags for shoes.
But I think there was a fairly well-informed discussion of quantum physics going on underneath the game.
A little bit. So do you think, like, when they were throwing those little choices in quotes at us, they were being critical of other games without choices, or what?
I think they were commenting on it. I don't know if they were making a value judgment about it.
Okay.
I'm not sure it goes as deep as them critiquing other games. They may be critiquing the idea of choice in life itself. Let's critique Call of Duty and let's critique fucking Doom and this and that and the other by having you choose a bird or a cage or a head or a tail.
Well, those games don't even have, like, the superfluous choices. I mean, like the kind of RPG things where you make these weird little choices, but you can tell it doesn't really make much of a difference. Even like Bioshock 1, right? When you chose to sacrifice the little girls or not, that was a fairly irrelevant choice.
It was.
But it was partially reflected in the gameplay, just a little bit. It was kind of hollow. And I feel like by throwing a type of choice in the game, and then the game doesn't react to that at all, is a bit more honest.
So what's the choice you made when you first start the game and then the couple are brought out and you're given a baseball and you can either throw it at the hawker or you can throw it at the couple?
I think I recognised that I wasn't making a choice. And I know that sounds really fucking pretentious, but I knew, even before I was asked, possibly, that this kind of stuff was likely to come up, having played the other two games. And I think the choice, especially in that instance, is so preposterous in its simplicity about asking you to make a.
What did you do?
The good one.
Right, so you threw it at the man. Right.
Yes.
How long did it take you to throw it at the man?
I was instantaneous about it because I dismissed its relevance, I think, very swiftly.
Danjo, what did you do?
Oh, I threw it at the man.
Right, I threw it at the couple. I wasn't so aware as you, Sim, that this was meaningless and nothing would happen because I'd read Bioshock was this and Bioshock was that, and I was thinking, my God, what effect will this have on the game, right? This is going to come up later, I know it will. But then I thought to myself, well, hold on a second, why the fuck would Booker DeWitt give a shit about this? All I know is that this is a dude who has to go to a city, he's obviously a mercenary of some type, and he's being paid to kidnap somebody or take someone.
It didn't say, bring us the girl, and in parentheses, a really nice guy.
And on that note, I think that the idea of racism in the game and also revolution were kind of really perfunctory. The society being racist was kind of a shorthand of you being told these are bad people.
Right.
And it wasn't exploring necessarily what racism was.
No, it didn't really seem like he tried to do that.
I'm deliberately playing devil's advocate here, okay? So bear that in mind when I say some of these things. It kind of felt like there's a story to be told here, and there's more context to be given here, which wasn't explored. Now, maybe that's because it's such a sensitive subject and such a terrible time in American history that they didn't think they needed to do it.
Isn't it just kind of making reference points, really, so that you get us? I felt it was more a way of providing a flavour of not just the society you were in, but also that time you were in. And I think they do quite a lot of work early on, from the minute you arrive in Colombia, to try and sort of ascertain the historical period in which you think you should be. And I think they kind of play on this when they, mess around with the things they present you with. Are we talking about spoilers now? From various different times, with the tears, basically, when you accept that you can step between dimensions or universes, and that some of these have progressed at different rates, or what have you. I think that I know that the argument about racism or the discussion of racism is slightly different. I kind of agree with you. They're causing offence without being offensive, I think. So they present what you understand to be an offensive position, but they're clearly presenting this rather than making this a statement of their beliefs. I think there is a shock value element to it.
I think I would have agreed almost entirely, except I happened yesterday to listen to an interview with a black academic who I think he's something like a professor of neuropharmacology at Columbia, okay? And he's written a book on the war on drugs, which I've ordered and I'll review on the show later. 1914... cocaine was widely used in products in various places. And Roosevelt created a drug czar, and this guy was a fanatic racist. This drug czar claimed that cocaine made blacks uncontrollable, gave them superhuman powers, and prompted them to rebel against white authority. 2 years before Bioshock is set, or 2 years after Bioshock is set, in 1914, there's this whole calamitous discussion and scaremongering about how drugs are affecting black people and making them superhuman, which seems to me a perfect analogy for vigors in the game.
Yeah, I think a lot of that period stuff they may have been aware of. I don't think any of the language that was
used... Why didn't they do something with it? Why didn't they make it meaningful?
Because it's not a game about racial struggle.
But the racial struggle is the first instance you get as to why you should be opposing Colombia as opposed to just going for the girl.
I think maybe that's not the point of that interaction. It's not to give you a reason to dislike the people you're shooting, because, I mean, face it, we'd shoot anybody that looked at us wrong in one of these games, right? I think what they were trying to go for was, look at this glorious city on the hill, right? This is everyone's stupid memories of America 2 generations back, right?
Sure.
And then just exaggerated to craziness. It's floating in the clouds. And then, oh, wait, no, it was never that grand, because no matter what wonderful things we did, there was this huge lesion on our side, right? And for this country's, I'm in America. The biggest one was probably racism against blacks. After we annihilated the Native Americans. It depends on what timeline you're in, but I think that's the purpose and why they're not really trying to dig into racism the way The Wire is, right? It's not really trying to inform you that way. It's just presenting this the good and then the horrible back to back.
Elizabeth as a character, I like the fact that I didn't have to escort her, and that she didn't have to be looked after, and she would throw me things, and that was incredibly useful. But by the same token, that means she could just be lured in from the theatre roof on a rope whenever the scene dictated that she speak to me. And so I think that the best thing they did with Elizabeth is that they got her the fuck out of the way, so I didn't have to worry about her.
Yeah, I think that's one of the greatest sort of bits of praise that you can say for what they did with it. Because normally escort missions in games suck, and I think we may have discussed this in some ways previously at various times. And to make what is essentially a series of extended escort missions not suck by having her die or get in the way or whatever was a positive thing. I'm not sure it was anything revolutionary, but it was a positive move, and I liked having her around. I found the character quite charming actually after a while, and not human obviously, but having human qualities, which it's hard, especially in escort missions, to have your compatriots represent.
I suppose so. I mean, I just, like, when she went, and looked at something, I always thought there'd be something there, but she was just examining the scenery. And so I've been trained to associate cues with NPCs as the cue should mean something. So in a sense, this game was having to get myself to accept that just because she sends something, it isn't a cue. So I suppose that's interesting.
Like a real person. Sometimes. All right. I mean, it's not like you keep your eyes peeled for every little thing that somebody else does. It's not gonna branch off into this amazing interaction.
But it is quite naturalistic, isn't it? It doesn't. It's not an solely scripted experience where A happens, then B happens, then C happens. She's not autonomous, and it doesn't really make any difference to what goes on around you, but it's, I think, a little naturalistic.
A little.
I mean, it was nice the way that every time I looked at a vending machine, she gave me money afterward.
So you appreciate her sugar mama qualities.
Yes. At the beginning, I thought Booker might try to get it on with her, which I found was a bit creepy.
Did something make you think that was going to happen, or was it just the assumption that, like, well, I'm a male character in a game, and here's a female character, of course they're going to interact romantically, or is there actually something that happened?
It was something about some script or some gesture by Booker, which maybe I misread because I'm so used to seeing female characters treated that way, especially kind of young, helpless ones. It wasn't a straight assumption. There was something happened. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, I'm not sure I got that. I guess I'd have to find the moment you talked about, but I didn't at any point expect it to turn into a... I know what you're saying, that you usually expect all male-female interactions to turn into some kind of romantic interaction, but I didn't ever get the sense that was going to happen. In fact, I felt uneasy that they were going to just kind of kill her off at any moment. I know that doesn't make any sense in terms of how games work. But, and there's kind of all this cliche about you'll want to look after X, Y, and Z, and it caused a bit of controversy, didn't it, when they were talking about Lara Croft and Tomb Raider, and everyone's like, I don't want to look after her, I want strong, independent female characters. But I think I was uneasy all the way through anyway, because I just wasn't sure what was going on, and I didn't. Yeah, I did. I jumped sometimes, like you do at horror films, not because it was scary, but because I didn't know what was coming next. There's maybe a background level of panic. but I think this might have been because I was expecting to be screwed with by the story. But I didn't ever feel like Booker was going to get romantically involved with her.
So we've just been screwed by media, right? That okay, well here's a character that you're supposed to maybe sympathize with a little bit. Well, there's only two things that could happen. You're either going to have sex, or the only reason she's been brought in is for like emotional sucker punch plot-wise when she gets, incredibly hurt or even killed. I think it's kind of interesting that they didn't do either. When there's a lot of characters in games and in other types of fiction where it's like, oh yeah, you're the person that's going to die later. That's why you exist.
She is a cute dog in a red shirt.
Like the Call of Duty Ghosts dog. I mean, they're going to kill that guy.
I guess in the end, I'm pleased that they didn't pull either of those two kind of automatic plot devices, right? That's kind of easy. And it seems a little sad to me that I know exactly what both of you are talking about, where just appreciating the story for what it is, or at least how you interact with Elizabeth for what it is in a way kind of tarnished by all the other crappy writing that we've been exposed to.
Yeah, but you didn't think there was crappy writing in this particularly?
The way that you interacted personally with Elizabeth, I didn't find any issue with the writing, but where it did try to fall apart a little bit was what exactly was her power? Was she jumping forward and backwards in time? Was she jumping laterally to different timelines, causation-wise? Was she doing both? Because that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't even mean anything. And I get the impression it's from the development standpoint, right? They've got this element where they're hinting at this power with the music. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Where she's got the music from the future going, but in the old-timey mode. I thought that was really clever, and I really liked it. But that only makes sense if she can go forward and backwards in time. And then there's the whole the narrative with her jumping around in different timelines, and that's really cool, and I like it. But the two together doesn't make any sense.
Explain why, science fiction boy.
Okay, so I mean, the idea is that if everything that could possibly happen, if you look at the multi-world way of looking at things, both things happen, and the timeline just branches, and everything that could possibly happen is happening. And then if you want to do time travel, you've got to have some type of mechanism for dealing with, going back and killing your grandpa, that kind of thing. The two together doesn't make sense. So, like, if she goes back in time and, say, kills not her grandpa, but her dad, right? Does that mean now that the timeline branched and one she did and one she didn't? Because that completely erases any meaningfulness of the action.
In dramatic terms, there's no point in this.
Right.
I think the thing they were trying to address was to kill Booker so that none of the bad stuff happened, so that he didn't become Comstock and go on this dimension-spanning rampage which caused death and destruction everywhere.
Right, but in the many worlds theory, just by killing him, all you've done is make it another timeline where he doesn't exist. That's fine. You still have all the other ones.
I think the thing that happened after the credits indicates that, I think that agrees with you. I think it doesn't resolve anything, even though you spend the entire game striving for resolution.
Yeah. I don't know, given that power and understanding like the philosophical ramifications of it, it'd be like, fuck it. Just go warp to a beach and basically be retired for the rest of your life. Like, nothing matters. No actions matter.
And
I can find gold anywhere, so it's not like we're going to run out of money.
My problem with it wasn't the philosophical sense or the sense in logic and physics. The idea that it's not interesting for the game, right? So the first time you see her, she goes fucking France Return of the Jedi. Then when she's running away, she manages to put a wall behind herself and you by opening a tear where a train goes past. But in combat, the tears are always, there's going to be a gun turret and a medical box and this and that and the other. And so it's like they're teasing you with all this shit she can do, and then for consistency purposes and gameplay purposes, nothing interesting happens with the tears in combat.
Right. Yeah, that was a little odd. I kind of got the impression that in combat, there was really only two timelines. The one you're in, and then the alternate where, I don't know, either the racist people are winning or the insurgents are winning, right? And those are the two timelines that in combat she's flipping back and forth.
Almost with the Animus concept, that the Animus in Assassin's Creed allows you to get away with all sorts of different stuff and have it consistent with the plot. I'd really like to see another developer who, I wouldn't say with more imagination, but a different imagination, get hold of the tear concept, and what would they do with it?
I'm thinking maybe she could only pull in things that were sharing the same physical space, just in a different timeline. And why would something be floating in the sky unless it was a Columbia timeline?
Well, what about Paris then? Unless that's Columbia, Paris, that's France floating in the sky in the 1980s.
Yeah, I guess you're right. She's completely omniscient. Not only does she jump timelines and where she is in the timeline, but physically where she is as well, all three simultaneously. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
I don't see a problem with that. I accept that it perhaps doesn't make any sense, but I think in a multiverse of infinite possibilities, that doesn't matter. And I agree with you about it having inconsistencies, but I don't mind that it has inconsistencies.
Do you think people like this game because it makes them question reality, or it asks them questions that video games haven't done before but have been asked in other media? Because when I saw the ending with the lighthouses and all the stars and stuff, again, it was just after the rapture bit, so my jaw was dropped, and it was beautiful. It was lovely, really intriguing. And I remember thinking to myself, this could be the end of a mini-series. Apparently Levine said, you haven't seen an ending like this in a game before. And if he said that, I think that's fair enough. But it wasn't an ending I could only have seen in a game before.
There's a category of themes and questions that I think makes the most sense in an interactive medium, such as video games, and that is the nature of control and free will. And Bioshock 1 hit this, Assassin's Creed hits this, Mass Effect hits this, and in the end poorly, right?
Yes.
But this is the theme where video games shine. And by now it may have been done to death. It needed to be hit.
But I think it's aware of it, and I don't think it ever makes any pretensions in its depth about the choice you have. But I do think there are some pretensions about the depth of the universe that you're interacting with, albeit that's been drawn for you. And I think the scope, I know it's represented, in its own cliche about lighthouses, in the final draw. But I think the scope of accepting the fixed things in the multiverse and examining the variable things in the multiverse I think that was pretty breathtaking. I think I was more taken aback by that than any of the narrative shocks.
I'm not terribly into science and multiverses as other people might be, but I've seen documentaries on the idea, I've read articles about the idea, and so what it was presenting me in terms of the multiverse wasn't new to me.
Right.
It didn't make me think about anything I hadn't thought about before. I will concede that the act of pressing a button or the act of having to do something so that the character makes a decision is more engaging than just observing that decision being made in the film.
That's not what makes this medium better for it, though.
What makes it better?
Well, Bioshock 1 does this the best, right? Where as gamers, we have these assumptions, similar to how we were talking about before, and then it plays with those assumptions and the concept of free will all at the same time. That you just do all of these things, you move down this only path you can take because you've done it 1,000 times before in 1,000 different games. And then they provide afterwards a context for why that might make sense, and you're blown away like, oh, right, yeah, I am a slave in this game, and I've been a slave in all those other games too. It's just there was no reason other than it would take too much resources to allow for actual freedom. In this game, I don't think they hit that same note again, right? No. It doesn't really matter what choice you make, and I think they're aware of that as well, because what they're actually trying to play around with is that all these different other versions of reality are really other versions of what Bioshock Infinite could have been if not for, Ken Levine made this decision instead of that decision.
Okay.
And you get a glimpse at all of the possibilities, and now Bioshock is over. There won't be another one.
I'm so cynical that when Elizabeth said, look at all these different universes, there's always a tower, there's always a lighthouse, there's always an evil man, I was thinking, this is how they explain every Bioshock game from now on and why it'll have the same plot.
They're not going to do that. I think the company might do that. I can't imagine Ken Levine doing that himself.
Apparently Levine has been signed up for rewriting Logan's Run.
Have you not seen it?
It's been a while since I've seen it.
Oh, right, yeah. At the age of 30, everyone is essentially retired because society has no way of feeding all the old people. There's a suggestion that society doesn't want to keep old people because they're not very pretty.
Well, welcome to Cameron's Britain.
I think actually it's probably, if we were to kind of analyze it in some depth, the new Logan's Run could have something to do with welfare reform and that's right, how you kind of starve all the poor people so that you only have lovely laser-faced people left.
I'm pleased to hear that Levine is doing that. Although, in retrospect, I'm not sure how much I enjoyed Bioshock Infinite. I loved the setting. I thought Columbia was a wonderful idea. I loved how it was presented, the sound effects. I liked the fact that basically everywhere you walked was wood, which sounds odd, but you don't normally hear wood sound effects in games anymore.
I love the word anymore. As in, like, every game since 1930, it's all been metal and plastic and shit.
The way they present things, so the scene where you go into his wife's shrine and the music is coming down and it's Mozart, I think it's his Requiem, that was beautiful. There's also one of those rooms where you have singing almost like the sirens from Oh Brother Where Art Thou, I think.
Yeah, aesthetically, that was great. And a nice change of pace, really, from most games.
And actually the scene where you see the Vox Populi being pushed into the flames, again, wonderfully staged. And when you go into the exhibition about the fight against the Red Indians, and you had the creatures looking like they came out of a pop-up book, which reminded me of children's books that my mother had. All of that was really well realised. I think that this is a game I would like to show my mother because of how beautifully it's presented.
You just need a way to kind of skimp through the shooter bits, which are ultimately boring compared to what you're talking about.
Increasingly we're getting into games which not only have stuff bolted on in terms of gameplay, but they sell you extra stories about them. Mass Effect, the prime example, but also this one. It's like, Danjo, you said to me, like, Songbird was never explained.
Right.
What is Songbird about? And to me, the obvious answer is pay 1,200 points to find out.
Yes, I had forgotten that they were actually releasing any DLC. I know there's a season pass, and one of my favourite things from this entire console cycle generation has been Minerva's Den, which I thought was a frankly brilliant bit of storytelling, and it probably compared to Bioshock Infinite, maybe even favourably to it, may have been a bit better. But I'm really curious about what they're going to do, but I'm not sure I anticipate them carrying on with the Booker and Elizabeth character.
Is there not a side of you that wants to look like, that sees Ken Levine in front of a board of people, and there's a checkbox called Season Pass, and he checks it and turns it around and shows it to them, like, oh yeah, we're going to have that. Revenue. Does that not rub you the wrong way in any way?
This is quite a pertinent discussion as well, isn't it, at the moment? There's a lot of talk in, quote, the industry, unquote, about how you monetize games and what DRM implications are for the next gen and blah, blah, blah. But I think he's been relatively vocal in this area about how you have to pay for stuff if you want it to be good. And I don't know. I didn't resent paying half price for Minerva's Den, and I guess I didn't buy the Bioshock Infinite Season Pass, and I probably wouldn't consider buying it until it was half price, partly because I'm a pauper, but also partly because I think you get the right value if you spend half of what the original asking price is for most DLC.
It's not the value side of it. I'm worried about it damaging the original story.
Okay.
I think depending on where you buy Bioshock Infinite, you get extra vigor potions or this or that, the other. If you bought the special edition, you got a piece for the board game, and if you reserve a copy of the board game, you get a new card that does something different. So they're fully, right? They are in that mud pile. They're fucking in it.
You think there'll be an issue of quality?
It's not quality. It is, what is the story you're telling me? Are you trying to leave out things to sell me later that would affect my understanding and appreciation of that story, right? So if they do release Songbird DLC, that feels a little bit cheap, because it's a central character to the story.
What if it's like a flight simulator where you go around shooting things with lasers?
Then I would be fine with that. But I think that if they said, here is Columbia, and we're going to tell you some different story that you haven't necessarily encountered in your gameplay, or you've encountered tangentially, I think I would be okay with that.
I'm expecting it to be like the Animatrix. You know The Matrix, the film? Well, there's a kind of series of, I think it was 5 animated stories to do with the universe of The Matrix. And
it's like 9 or 10.
Was it? Yeah. I think I made it halfway through. No, I just didn't remember. And they're really neatly told because they are from, not even from ordinary people in a way, but they're from people who are aware of The Matrix, or, most humans are just kind of plugged into it. But I think there's scope here to tell stories like that from different versions of the universe, perhaps with things completely unrelated to the overarching grand story of redemption.
After having seen the infinite lighthouses in the beautiful sunset, are you interested in another angle on Columbia?
Yes,
No.
because. So I am interested in Columbia because what Levine and his team have done consistently. I played 2 of his games, right? 2 of his settings, Rapture and Columbia. I've wanted to visit both. If there was a no gameplay version of Bioshock Infinite, where you put on an Oculus Rift and you just walked around the city and you got to travel wherever you wanted to, and it was reasonably priced, and I had an Oculus Rift, I would buy that.
All right, that's fair.
Would you expect the inclusion of, barbershop quartets?
I want to take tours in these places. I want to walk around as a pedestrian in Rapture and in Columbia.
But not empty.
With people in them. I don't necessarily have to speak to anyone. I can just watch them interact.
When you're explaining what you would like from additional Bioshock stuff about how explaining exactly there needs to be other people there, but I don't need to have to interact with them too much.
Yeah.
You kind of had this vibe like you were explaining to somebody that runs a brothel exactly the experience that you wanted.